Depford, South London, 1993. Two thugs plot to take down Cass Pennant because he's black and a West Ham supporter. One of the assailants pulls out a gun and fires 3 shots at Cass. We flash back 20 years. 3 young West Ham United fans are walking down the street when they witness a mob of Wolverhampton supporters attacking and urinating on their friends. The boys try to flee but are blocked by their own crew. They laugh at the boys' cowardice and charge into the fight. The young fans decide to join the brawl. At that time, West Ham's top firm was led by Stephen Hogan. Cass eagerly joins the mass fight. He is only 14, but feels for the first time that he belongs to something big and important. Life hadn't been easy for Cass up until then. A 49-year-old white woman decided to adopt a black baby named Carol. At 10, Carol wished to look like everyone else, but no matter how hard he scrubbed, he couldn't turn his skin white. In an underpass, 3 bullies wait for him. The smallest is the most aggressive. They kick Carol and make racist jokes, saying they saw his mother at the zoo and it's time for him to go back to the jungle. But Freeman and Brenda stand up for Carol, inspiring him to fight back. From that day on, the trio is inseparable. Another school uniform is ruined. His mother can't afford to buy new ones after every fight. The boy curses and argues with her. He hates his girly name, which only brings him more trouble. He asks to be called Cass, after the greatest boxer, Cassius Clay. Doll agrees, but asks her son to stay out of trouble in return. Before a football match, Cass's adoptive father, Cecil, a big West Ham fan, takes him to a pub. The firm's core members aren't happy to see a black boy in their den, but Cecil stands up for his terrified son. He asks Cass to stay close to him to avoid any harm from the drunken supporters. For years pass, and even after the fight with the Wolves, Cass is still barred from the pub. Steve Hogan resolves the issue. 10 years later, Cass and his friends are respected figures. They associate with the dangerous gangster Ray, who is facing a decade in prison. Freeman makes an ill-timed joke about Ray's sentence, and Ray intimidates him until bursting into laughter, revealing it was just a joke. In their daily lives, these tough football hooligans are ordinary construction workers. Prentice works in an office but, like his friends, eagerly anticipates Fridays for the brawls. The skirmishes grow more intense, and the firm becomes known as the Inner City Firm. They are the youngest gang in London, with Lead Service Crew as their main rivals. Both gangs confront each other with chance. Cass, the big man, always leads his crew. While the hosts fend off attackers in their backyard, some of the Hammers fans invade and trash their pub. Prentice brings the latest newspapers to his friends. Chelsea, as usual, dominates the front page, while they are relegated to the 4th. Freeman's girlfriend, naked, emerges from the bedroom and insults Cass, calling him a dirty animal. In response, Freeman kicks her out onto the street in that state. Cass is upset but more preoccupied with planning their next attack. He seeks revenge on Newcastle for the bombs they threw at them last season. The plan is to ambush them the day before the game, catching them off guard. The trio meets with a journalist intent on exposing one of England's most violent firms. Cass's parents see the report. He explains that while firms can be breeding grounds for racism, it's the only place where he was accepted. He also tries to argue that they aren't criminals. They are just men blowing off steam after a hard week's work. Some people smoke, some drink, they fight. Cass is proud of his interview, and he got paid £50 for it. His mother is now worried the police could come for him at any moment. Cass declares he has no intention of slaving away his whole life like his adoptive father. He wants something more. Even Margaret Thatcher has started to talk about the problem of football hooliganism. Cass inspects his fighters and the weapons they brought. He weeds out the weak and the young. The top hooligans load into their transport and head to their enemies in Newcastle, who are currently enjoying themselves at a club. Cass rallies his fighters, telling them that today they will earn respect and prove which firm is the best in Britain. A mob stormed into the club, creating utter chaos. Unlike their rivals, they had weapons, making their attack swift and brutal. This incident led to Cass receiving the first ever long-term sentence for football hooliganism. 4 years. In prison, he was initially given the dirtiest uniform, but when the warden recognized him as the infamous Cass, his treatment improved. His cellmates were 2 other black inmates. One of them, an aggressive type, intimidated the smaller inmate and taunted Cass for speaking like a white man. This black racist was fixated on this issue, so Cass told him to go back to Africa. A fight broke out between the 2 men. At one point, the cellmate pulled out a blade but eventually cooled off and lay down. As a result, Cass was moved to another cell. However, his new cellmate also insisted that Cass should embrace his culture. Prison life was tough for Cass. There was no proper plumbing, forcing him to use a bucket for everything, even brushing his teeth. One day, Cass was brought to a cell to meet an influential prisoner, who turned out to be his old acquaintance, Ray. Ray had recently been transferred there. He got straight to the point, discovering that the firm wasn't funded through racketeering or drugs, just a group of dreamers. Ray suggested Cass could easily rally hundreds of experienced fighters and more recruits if needed. He proposed a business venture, but Cass didn't want to get involved in crime. Thanks to Ray, Cass gained some privileges and began working on a draft of a book about football subculture. His cellmate asked if he wanted to find his biological parents, but Cass didn't care. His parents were in London, and that was that. Cass was released in 1986. He was shocked to find out he could only take the belongings he had when he was incarcerated, including the drafts he had been working on for years. The warden, with a smug satisfaction, threw his notebooks into the trash. The book could have been his ticket to a life outside the firm. The ICF members welcomed their leader back. In the pub, a charming woman caught Cass's eye, and he hers. However, Freeman was also making moves on her. Meanwhile, her friend was harassed by a skinhead. The verbal altercation escalated into physical violence, leaving the woman on the floor. Cass wanted to intervene, but, after facing resistance, decided to let it go. The disgruntled woman was escorted out, but Cass struck up a conversation with her friend and offered her some wine. Cass arrived home late that evening. His mother hoped he had learned his lesson and would now settle down and find a job. Suddenly, Cecil insisted that she tell Cass about his biological parents wanting to connect with him, his real parents from Jamaica. But as before, Cass insisted that they were his real family, and he had no interest in letters from strangers. He proudly shared that he now had a girlfriend. Cass had never been this nervous before a date. Freeman even bet a pound that his friend would mess it up. Elaine invited Cass to a restaurant. He was shaking, having never been to such a place, and unable to understand the menu. Elaine was surprised he hadn't beaten up the skinhead back at the pub. Only it wasn't quite true. Cass simply ordered the same as Elaine. She then warned him that he was about to be served sheep's testicles. The idea of eating testicles terrified him until she admitted she was joking. Elaine told Cass she couldn't continue dating him if he kept getting into fights every weekend. A year passed. With the stadiums now full of surveillance cameras, attacks moved to the streets, making ICF members prime targets. Arsenal fans ambushed Prentice, slashing him with razors. The mutilated man needed 1,000 stitches. Elaine, disgusted by these discussions, walked away. Freeman accused Cass of trading the firm for a girl. Cass vowed to meticulously plan and exact brutal revenge on those who attacked Prentice. Elaine confided to her friend that she loved Cass, but his loyalty to West Ham was ruining everything. When she visited him, Cass was out launching an assault on Arsenal fans. They beat the thugs soundly, but during the fight, the firm's core member was stabbed in the groin. Elaine was at his apartment when his friends dragged him home. She cried and screamed, wishing Cass would give up this violent life. His obsession with violence was unhealthy, and if he continued, he'd end up either in prison or dead. She didn't want to raise a child alone. She was pregnant. Elaine urged him to find a job because she wouldn't be able to support them all while on maternity leave. This pushed Cass to approach Ray with a business proposition. Ray owned several nightclubs across London, and Cass could provide as many bouncers as needed. He planned to deal directly with Ray, avoiding any security firms. Freeman wasn't thrilled about wearing a suit, though he had one for court appearances. The friends agreed to the new job because staying in the ICF had become too dangerous. They faced potential 10-year sentences for football-related violence. Thatcher's crackdown had put an end to the original football chaos, but nightclubs were now packed to the brim. Cass supplied Ray with the biggest and toughest black bouncers. He made his wife happy, and his life settled into a peaceful routine. The couple was raising their 5-year-old son, and another baby was on the way. However, old enemies hadn't forgotten. The thug who slashed Prentice aimed to hurt Cass as well. One evening, as Cass arrived at a club, Arsenal hooligans followed and shot him. They fled immediately. The past had caught up with him. Doctors doubted his recovery, but after 2 months, Cass was back on his feet. Ray found the attackers and offered Cass the chance to decide their fate. One day, an elderly Cecil informed Cass that his mother had passed away. That day, Cass finally opened the unopened letters from his Jamaican parents. Later, football hooligans sent him a wreath and a threatening card. During the funeral, the priest invited the mourners to say a few words about the deceased. Cass wanted to speak. He thanked Doll for everything she had done for him. He wasn't close with Cecil and hesitated to embrace him. The old man insisted that Cass read the letters immediately, but Cass had already thrown them away. Ray approached, suggesting they deal with the thugs together, but Cass felt he needed to handle it alone. Cass received frequent silent phone calls until one day, someone asked if he liked the flowers. Cass dreamed of executing the shooters and was woken by the police. They were still investigating the attack, but Cass refused to cooperate. He became paranoid, lashing out at his wife and children, and suffering from constant hallucinations. Elaine returned home one day to find the furniture smashed and her husband missing. Cass realized he needed to confront his demons and deal with the thugs once and for all. He and his friends arrived at a pub in a hearse, bringing cold weapons in a coffin. Inside the pub, Cass handed a wreath to the shooter and pointed a gun at him. Ray urged him to pull the trigger, but Cass decided against committing the crime. He realized that he wasn't merely a victim of lifelong troubles, he was their cause. Cass could endure a lifetime in prison, but he thought of Elaine and the kids. They didn't care about his reputation, they loved him for who he was. On that day, Cass finally understood this.